Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Empathic Leader, where we talk all things empathy, EQ, and leadership. I am Dr. Melissa, and I'm so happy to have you here with me today. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment so that we can keep the conversation going, because this shouldn't just be me talking to you. This should be us talking to one another. So, which actually brings me up to my guest today. He has been an amazing force in my life as I get my book ready to go, which, by the way, is coming out July 15th. So I'm so excited that this thing is finally happening. It's the Empathic Leader. So we actually talk about how empathy transfers to leadership, how it does influence profit, productivity, and innovation, and how people can start using it now. So please help me welcome my guest today, Jesse Sussman. Hi.
That was awesome.
Well, I'm so glad to have you here today because, I mean, as my audience knows, this quest with this book has been going on like forever. And if not for you, it wouldn't be actually happening. So I am so grateful to you and for all of your work and everything you've done. And we've got an audiobook brewing in the background, and there's all this amazing stuff. So just, a lot of gratitude to you, Jesse. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for that, for having me. And also just want to say also thanks to you, this book is happening and it's coming out. So huge thanks to you and all the years you spent formulating it. I wanted to start by asking you, we're obviously going to cover multiple topics in terms of empathy, actionable empathy, cognitive empathy. But to start, I wanted to ask, how have you needed to navigate the principles that are in the book through the publishing process as a first-time author? I'm sure it's come up, right?
Oh, yeah. As you know, yes, over and over and over. I mean, both insofar as giving empathy, because I had some real difficult times in the beginning. I had a publisher who, I don't want to flat out say that he, was untruthful, but there was definitely some problems there. And, there was some other rocky things that happened. And through all of that, on one hand, I'm trying to have empathy for people who obviously have none for me within this process, but also to have it for myself, because I'm like, how could I be so stupid? How could I not see this? What is wrong with me? I mean, and to understand, it's a learning process. I'm new to this. Of course, I'm going to make some mistakes, but it's actually taken a lot. And it's something I do struggle with, because it's just like, how did I not know this? But I didn't know,
Totally. I mean, that's one of the, I think, most frustrating parts about doing something new and being in an environment and then having such adverse challenges come up in the process, is it seems like there is this tendency to self-blame. So when you're in the workplace and there is this tragic incident that happens, or just a really toxic culture that's happening, as somebody who's been through that myself, it almost feels comforting to some part of the psyche to put the blame on yourself for having allowed it to happen. I think maybe it has something to do with control and making you feel like you could avoid it next time. I don't know. I don't have the degree to know that, but it's so interesting to notice that tendency to self-blame in adversity, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's that judgment piece again. I'm judging myself for not knowing. I'm judging myself for not reacting how I should have. I'm judging myself for, not being a worldly seasoned author, which I'm not. And, it's like we say, judgment and empathy cannot exist in the same space. And that includes judgment for yourself. But it's there. It's a very human thing. And I mean, when I say that too, I'm separating out judgment from critique, to critique and to say, how could I do this better? Maybe I can build on this. Perhaps, next time I could do it this way. That's different, because that's growing and that's learning and that's building. Judgment always rips down.
And it's that separation between judgment and critique feels really important. And also sometimes I feel like I'm not in control of the judgment when it enters, right? So I feel like I can't shut it off. I can't turn the light as if it was a light switch, or I can start judging myself for judging myself, in that, and that just like the square root, the cube root, that just goes endlessly. And then I'm really tired and I need to lie down. But I think when you have that adversity and then you have this experience of judgment, how do you respond to that empathically? How do you respond to that with the kind of response that you talk about in the book of actionable empathy? Where do you even begin?
So the place to begin is always with the self, with looking inward, and the first thing that needs to happen is self-reflection. And that just means you're looking in at it, you're reflecting on what happened. These are the facts. Think about it like being a computer. You want to be critical, not caring. So you're not placing judgment on it. You're not hating yourself. You're not hating anybody else. You're just crunching the data. You're reflecting on it. From self-awareness and understanding where that is for yourself, you can move to self-awareness or self-reflection. I mean, you go from self-reflection to self-awareness, which is, self-reflection is in self-awareness. You start to understand how this fits into the greater world. How does this fit in with my relationships? How did these interactions happen? How does this now relate to the book? The things outside of myself that I interact with, but don't necessarily, I can't control them, And then from self-awareness, then you can move to self-empathy. Because if empathy is understanding and connection, then by having self-reflection, going to self-awareness, you can now begin to understand and connect with yourself, which is a lot harder than it sounds. You and I have had this discussion, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when we talk about going from self-awareness to self-reflection, there's the cultivation of empathy, which I think a lot of people want the results that you talk about in the book on an organizational level, right? They say, sign me up. You quote the Ernst & Young studies and everything looks really good in that regard. Better profits, better morale in the workplace across the board. But that also, as you discuss in the book, implies that for the people that want those results and also want to model empathy and embody it, they also have to also have the desire to face the difficulties that come with that cultivation of empathy and kind of the emotional vulnerabilities that come up with that, which busts a lot of the myths that a lot of people talk about, where you need to leave your emotions at the door in the workplace. You need to separate, the compartmentalizing is kind of out of control if we want to be humans in relationship with each other, right? But can you speak to that, not only wanting the results of how empathy benefits organizations, but also needing to accept the journey or be open-minded enough on the intellectual level, but then also when it in the real-time moments of responding when it's uncomfortable?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in order to answer that, the first thing we have to do is actually define empathy, which is a whole different thing because it's massive. It's a huge subject. And it's one that really was only recognized around the beginning of the 1900s. And in the very beginning, it actually meant something closer to pity, which is not how we recognize it now. It's gone through this evolution, and it spans psychology, biology, neurobiology, philosophy, all these different things. So in society, we have a lot of weird definitions floating around about what it is. The most popular definition for people is that I feel what you feel. And that's absolutely one, totally. But there's 43 kinds of empathy. That's one. 43 kinds fit into 8 broad categories. So if we actually start thinking, well, what other kinds of empathies are there? The one that I come back to a lot within organizations is cognitive empathy, which means I logically understand what you're feeling. I just don't necessarily feel it. So as a leader, as someone who's going to be dealing with burnout, as someone who's going to have to be able to set up boundaries, as someone that's going to be in a position where work has to get done. I mean, business is business. It has to get done. I think that's really the place to start, is understanding, what other people are feeling or what other people are going through, what it is to be in another person's shoes, which is called perspective taking, in the literature and that kind of thing. So I think it's really important, first of all, to actually agree on what we're talking about. And that empathy is more than just feeling, a lot more. It's really about understanding and connection between humans. So, I think this is really important that we start on the same ground. The next thing to keep in mind too is that empathy, as we know it, doesn't always work very well in all situations. For instance, we have a hard time with empathy for groups of people. Stalin said, a single death is a tragedy, but 1 million deaths is a statistic. And that's horrible. But for whatever reason, it's how our mind works. That's why on the news, you'll have a headline of a little girl who fell down a well, and they'll gloss over everything that's happening in other countries. So as a leader, you're dealing with groups of people, which means you've got to start with cognitive empathy, because the emotional empathy isn't going to kick in like it should. It's the way we're made as humans. Maybe it's just too overwhelming for us to be able to take on that kind of tragedy. But, it is part of it.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about that cognitive empathy there, ideally would, because one of the things you mentioned in the book are these different styles of management and leadership, and there's some really antiquated models of leadership means controlling the people that are beneath you in the corporate hierarchy, right? The people that are reporting to you, and there's a lot of people that are in that position, and they don't want to embody the things that you're talking about here, because they are not putting the well-being of their people and in their organization as their fundamental priority. It's more authoritarian. I've got my people in check. This is good. It's a completely different way of relating. So how do you start? I want to mention this more towards the end, but the flags discussion that you have in the end of the book, to help identify what type of organizational issues there might be, and whether it's even possible to implement new levels or layers of relating. So I think my question for you is, how do you even begin evaluating the possibility of incorporating empathy on the organizational level, on the individual level? The assessment here as a coach and consultant and leader, that must be such a huge part of your job.
It is, because it's a lot more comfortable to just do things the way they've always been done. I mean, this is how we do things. I hear that so often. And it's like, no, you have to have a willingness to change. So when you're thinking about adult learning, first you have to have an awareness that there's a gap, right? An awareness that there is something you don't know and you need to learn it. Because if you have people that don't think there's anything to learn, then do you know about the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Yeah. It's the people that would benefit from it are not the ones that are open-minded enough to know. It's along those lines.
Yeah, exactly. The more you know that you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the less you know, the more you think you already know. So, that's the first step, you have to be aware that you don't know. The second step is you have to have the desire to bridge that gap. And that's why you'll have a lot of people that are trying to quit a habit, right? Like smoking or drinking or diet soda or whatever. They have an awareness that this stuff isn't good for them, but they don't have the desire to quit, until something happens. If you don't quit with the soda, you're going to end up losing a leg to diabetes. Well, now they have a reason. The desire is there, and it's the same with leadership. So, maybe they're aware that they're not leading as well as they could. A lot of people get into leadership positions not because they're the best leader, but because they're the best technically, or they just happen to be in the right places, or they bring in the highest paid contracts. So a lot of times they'll get into these leadership positions and they know that what they're doing may not be the best. The awareness is there. But as long as things are at least kind of clicking along, the desire to change isn't. Mm-hmm. So the question is, what's becoming so painful that you have to change? Are you losing so many employees that people are starting to go, well, what's the deal here? Is there a bunch of huge change that isn't getting done or is failing? I mean, the statistics of the amount of change that fails either a little bit or completely is like 60-70%, which runs along with what I've seen out in the world, that kind of thing. So what is causing the desire? And for a lot of people, just the understanding that it will change. Profit, productivity, and innovation isn't enough. You can't just have the carrot out here in the future. You have to have a pain point happening right now that you want to alleviate. And right now, that's employee attrition, that's generational friction, that's AI and big technology and big data. And empathy can actually play into all of those.
And those are, with the speed that things are changing, it feels like this is only becoming more and more pertinent to learn, both on the leadership level and on the employee level, how to implement that, right? And these are skills that transfer not only in the workplace, although they're extremely beneficial there, but in relationship with everyone that you come into contact with. I feel like you don't have to be in a relationship with people or someone to be in relationship with them, right? You're always in contact, and it doesn't mean you can have contextual ways of this person I'm in a relationship with, these people I work with, but that doesn't mean that you slice off large parts of your humanity and your desire to see other people succeed in the process. So let's back up a second and just tell me what led you to write this book in the first place.
So it was a personal experience. I was a performing musician, classical musician, for a long time. I was a French hornist. I played piano before that. I sang in bands. I worked my way through college playing organ. That's what I did. I loved it. And I loved it enough that I actually did all my degrees in it, and I was out and I was gigging. And I mean, I got to do some really cool things. I got to tour Europe as a soloist. I got to play in Rome and in Amsterdam and in Budapest. And, I got to do things. My background, my mom was elementary teacher and housewife, and my dad was enlisted military. So it's not like there was a lot of money there. And if I was going to go do what I was doing, I needed to find another way to do it. And music allowed me to do that, not because there was a lot of money there, but because there was a lot of opportunity there. If you work really hard and you get good at what you're doing and you happen to have the right opportunities. And that's what it did. And I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I loved going where I went. I loved doing what I did. But being a gigging musician doesn't guarantee things like food, shelter, clothing, and benefits. So it finally hit a point where I needed to have a little more stable life. So I went back, got the doctorate, got a teaching degree to be a professor at a university. And I mean, just to set the stage, to be a French horn professor, a tenured French horn professor, the year that I won my job, there might have been like 12 in North America. It incredibly, they're so hard to get. And the ones that are there, you're almost waiting for someone to die, because once people get them, they're not leaving,
Yeah. I can imagine the stakes are incredibly high in the pressure. Yeah.
And for a job that doesn't really pay that well, it's strictly because you had better love it, because if you don't, there is no other reason to do it. If there isn't that much glory and there isn't money in it, so you better really love what you're doing. So I'm setting the stage on all of this because I did love it that much. And I went out, I got this job, and without my very first term there, I was assaulted by one of my colleagues. And I mean, realized that I didn't have any support. I didn't have family. I didn't have friends. I hadn't even been there long enough to, know different roads and where the best grocery store was and who's going to cut my hair, the stuff that happens after you do a cross-country move. And that was bad enough. I mean, something like that just shouldn't happen. The problem became worse, though, when I tried to work my way through the system. when I went to our boss, I was told that if I was stirring up trouble as a junior female faculty member in my first term, I might as well forget about tenure. And I mean, yeah, this guy had an office right next to mine. I wasn't worried about tenure. I was worried about coming into work, because that's what happened. He caught me unaware in my office. And when I went to the dean, which would have been the boss of the person I went to, she told me if I didn't like it there, I should leave. Didn't care. And I worked my way steadily through the system. But the thing that seemed to keep coming back is either people were like, I'm sorry, but I just can't help you. Or they were just like, nope, my job is to keep you quiet so that we just don't have a problem. And for the most part, beyond the initial actors, these weren't bad people. These were people that were just doing their job and trying to get by and trying to, get through to retirement. But they had been so beaten down by this system that empathy was just impossible. They couldn't connect with me because it was just beyond what their job would allow them to do. And I eventually had to leave, and I lost my whole career because of it.
Yeah, I'm so sorry that, that you had to go through that experience, because that feels like multiple confrontations with such lack of empathy and lack of, there's the incident that you describe in the book and you just talked a little bit about. There's that wanting to going to the boss's boss, and some of it you're met with outright hostility in which you write about, which is absolutely disgusting. But it also seems like you're able to see that there are multiple different levels here of nuance, and people are locked in institutionally. It sounds like you're also evaluating or taking into account this system is failing you because it's failed a lot of other people in the process. Okay, so you go through all of that. What fire gets stirred in you as a result?
It took a long time. I appreciate you saying that I was able to pick up on the nuance of this, but it didn't happen immediately. When I left, I was just angry. I was beaten and I was angry. And I didn't really know what to do. And I spun for 6-7 years. My husband and I did consulting, and I did everything I could do to stay in the background. I did the data. I did the HR stuff. I did not, I hid because I didn't want to know. But the thing that really, really finally got me, I was working in a big healthcare facility. I had taken a secretarial job because we needed benefits. There's a theme here in my life, I guess, but we needed the benefits. And I had been in that job for 2 or 3 months, and I ended up with pulmonary emboli, which are blood clots in the lungs. And I don't know what happened, but it was painful. I ended up in the ER and I ended up being admitted. And that's really the first time I'd been in the hospital. I'd always been very healthy. But I went back to this job and I went to talk to my boss, and I'm like, this isn't good. This could have been a lot worse, but I know I've only been here 3 months. I don't have FMLA. I don't have vacation time, but I really need some time to rest. This is really knocked me out. And she didn't actually say anything. She went and then walked away. And that was the point at which I was like, that is it. We cannot keep treating people like this. You're supposed to be a healthcare facility. You're supposed to be people that are taking care of people and have the most empathy. And yet this is how you treat the people who are closest to you, who prop you up, your employees. That's enough. There's got to be more to this than meets the eye. And that's when I started digging around, and I started my MBA, and I was like, I don't know where I'm going, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I can't stay here like this. This can't continue.
There's just a level of decency that you would expect as a human in the world. There's and especially when you're entering a new organization, moving cross country like you did, to be met without a support system, completely rebuilding your life from scratch. I can only imagine how difficult that is to be met with such hostility, emotional immaturity, how could you not spin after something like that? Especially after you take these steps to try to resolve it and stick it through. And that's horrific. It also sounds like it did fortify a value within you of wanting to help change these kinds of responses to, the welfare of anybody in an institution that's being prejudiced against or not being heard.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my whole thing. If I can keep a single person, any single person, from not feeling as alone and as thrown away and as lost as I felt for 7 years, then I've done my job. Because there is no reason why we treat each other in this way in the name of business or in the name of organizations or even in the name of, well, I just didn't notice. It's not okay. It's not okay.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And it feels like it wouldn't be so hard to be kind in an instance like that, right? Yeah. If you're trying to imagine what the other person could say or do in an instance, it almost would be more refreshing, honestly, if I'm trying to imagine it for myself. Hey, I'm sorry, I have health insurance and I need to keep it, right? And so I really understand what you're saying, and this is wrong, the way that you're being treated. And there would be so many things messed up about that dynamic anyway, right? With health insurance being tied to that, but just some honesty about it instead of this kind of pretending. So yeah, is there anywhere particular you would like to go? Because I have parts from the book I can highlight. Is there anything that's standing out to you in, where you want to take us next?
One point I do want to make before we leave that subject is that while this is my experience and this is what happened to me, I wasn't the only one in either circumstance. This was happening to others. This was happening. This isn't just how I was treated. This is how people were treated within. And I think that's the thing. My story is not a one-off.
Absolutely. And there's so much courage that comes with trying to see it through there. And it's almost really difficult to know how many people are going through that same experience, because especially when you go through incredible amounts of toxicity like that, you don't know how to respond. A lot of the time you're processing it as you're living through it, right? So there isn't how you got in a fight with somebody and there's a comeback and you think of it a few days later in the shower or whatever. But this is like years long of kind of being stunned and kind of in a freeze survival state. And that survival state is ironically enough makes it harder for you to probably embody empathy if somebody else approached you in a similar situation, right?